also connect to Facebook. And welcome everybody to our Bible study of the book of Titus, by way um, of remembering for us. Let's remember that Titus is the second of three books in the New Testament under the title of pastoral letters, meaning that St. Paul, in his work to start churches and to spread the gospel of Jesus, he founded churches, and he founded a lot of churches. Many of those churches are still in operation. Probably most of them probably aren't. That's just the up and down of how churches go. But in our first study, which we spent the last 5 weeks doing, of the book of First Timothy, we saw that that Paul was writing to Timothy, who had taken over his work in the city of Ephesus, a seaside city that's now located in Turkey, and that he had some work to do there. He had some people to address because there was some false teaching going on. You guys remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And they were teaching a gospel that was apparently enriching the elders who had been raised up from that community, and they were overseeing house churches that made up the church in Ephesus, and were preaching a gospel that was particularly attractive to young women, especially young widows. And so there was some terse talk against these elders who were out after greedy gain, and the silencing of these gossipy women who were going to support that. Now we turn our attention over to Titus. Titus, as we'll find out in our first chapter here, it's just a couple of chapters, this book. Titus, as we will see, was obviously an accolade of St. Paul's. Paul is writing to him and has left him on the island of Crete. Anybody here been to the island of Crete? Anybody here who want to go to the island of Crete?
Sure.
Especially right about now in February in Michigan. That would be fantastic. But the idea is that Paul had left Titus on the island to do some work there. And as we'll see as we unpack this letter, the work is different than that which he has set up for Timothy in Ephesus. Crete has a number of churches there, and we'll see through this letter that the job is pretty much for Titus to raise up elders to run those churches. And so the advice that we're going to get is, people who study these things, you guys, really, except for a few verses, call Titus kind of a retread of First Timothy, meaning we're going to hear a lot of similar messages in Titus that we heard in First Timothy. However, it is going to be it's a letter of encouragement. You probably break it down to two themes. One is that it is a prophylactic. And what I mean by that, it is a warning against false teachers, but it is not as big a warning as we found in First Timothy. Secondly, it's going to be a letter of encouragement. It is going to call Titus to remember what his better angels are telling him, that the gospel is true, that the gospel is life, that the gospel is the way of love that endures, at least as we can attest to, for a couple thousand years. That this Jesus that was at the heart of Paul's conversion to Christianity from Judaism is really at the heart of his work to spread God's love to the world. This idea that Judaism resulted as a consequence of God loving the world and choosing a certain people in a certain place to be heralds of that love is at the heart of Judaism. I mean, that's why the Jews were given to the world, so that the Jews might attest to God's love for the world, that all would come to a deeper knowledge of who God is, and what we like to say is a saving knowledge. And what do we mean by a saving knowledge? Other than that, we are saved from the consequence of us living otherwise. Think about it, you guys. What would it be like not to live a life in which we endeavored, not accomplished, but endeavored to follow and seek after love every day? As you and I wake up, by some permutation or another, we are seeking to do intentional acts of love. We are seeking to find love in the world. There is a world around us that's constantly bombarding us with what Abraham Lincoln called our lesser angels, right? Oh, you're not going to make it. You're not handsome enough. You're not important enough. Your life doesn't add up to anything. Especially amplified under this COVID lens that's making everybody feel lonely and depressed and even addicted, depending on your poison, to new levels. But the gospel is antithetical to that. I mean, it is the opposite. The gospel tells us that a loving God created us with God's breath, and that we are equipped and destined to walk and live in love. And what that means, because we've been given love, is that we might give love back. This is how the world will be saved, is loving people to understand that in their heart is love, and that our job is to share that love. This is what the Christian life is about. And as we know, Christians make up not the majority of religious in the world, but they make up the largest minority, right? So that we are not here to judge other belief systems. We are here to declare, as Paul is going to say in his letter to Titus, we are here to declare this love has come into the world. And if you are looking for a way to live your life that is based, what I think, on the highest ideal, which is love and care for others, then this is a great way to do it. My dad, when I was a kid, we grew up in this area, and his, I think at the time, Birmingham was huge. In that it's now a lot smaller. People say Birmingham and they think of a certain area, but back then it was a much larger area. And he always used to say, well, Birmingham is not a bad place to live. And what he meant by that is that you can go travel the world and come back and find that this isn't a bad place to live. And what he meant by that, and my point here, is that we can look at all kinds of different belief systems, but in terms of accomplishing our goal of living a life of love and living a life that shares love with the world, Christianity ain't a bad way to do it. Okay, with all its flaws, with all its problems. I haven't investigated Islam and Hinduism and all the great world religions to the extent, because life is short. And if my job and my desire is to live a life of love centered on other people, centered on helping other people, then this is a good way to go. And this is at the heart of Paul's message here to Titus. He comes as a Jew converted to Christianity. And remember, the early church was, I mean, this was a Jewish cult. This was a Jewish sect that broke away. And we're going to hear about the very first biggest controversy in Christianity, which of course was a debate among Jewish Christians that, well, do you have to become Jewish to become a Christian? And the people who said, yes, you need to, are referred to as Judaizers, right? Jude meaning Jewish, right? Judah, the land of the Jews. And so the Judaizers were saying, look, in order to be a Christian, you got to be a Jew first. You've got to get circumcised. You've got dietary laws. You've got all kinds of rituals. And then there's the other side, which Paul was a proponent of because of his revelation from God. And what Christianity ended up settling on was that it is by faith that you are saved and not by works. In other words, to be a Christian is a belief thing, and that you don't need to be circumcised or obedient to Jewish laws. The only law you need to be obedient to is to love God with your whole heart, soul, mind, and being. Love your neighbors yourself, right? And this, you may define that as a law or not, but the idea being that this is going to appear in this letter, that there are going to be people saying, hey, wait a minute, if you want to be a Christian, you got to be a Jew first. And so this really split the church at the beginning. And this in some permutations or another continues to be a challenge for us. So I think I've preached enough in terms of an introduction to what we're talking about today. So why don't we crack open the book? Shall we say a prayer together? Well, let us pray. Almighty and everlasting God, we give you great thanks for St. Paul, as human as he was, yet the divinity inside of him that was given to him by you, the divinity in each one of us, because we have been touched by you, certainly shined forth when he wrote this wonderful book to his apostle Titus. We pray that you would open our eyes, help us read, learn, mark, and inwardly digest that which you have for us today, that we might better love ourselves and the world you've given us. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.
All right, so let's go ahead and share Titus from the New Revised Standard Version. And I'll try to make this bigger. I know there's some people's eyes who are newer than others, and a bigger version helps us. So we've got the NRSV we're going to look at here. And Kathy, why don't we ask you to read verses 1 through 4? This is the basic Pauline introduction, and we'll ask you to read it.
One big long sentence, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Paul, a servant of God and apostle of Jesus Christ, for the sake of the faith of God's elect and the knowledge of the truth that is in accordance with godliness, in the hope of eternal life that God, who never lies, promised before the ages began. In due time, he revealed his word through the proclamation with which I have been entrusted by the command of God our Savior. To Titus, my loyal child in faith, we share grace and peace from God the Father and Jesus Christ our Savior.
There you go. Very good, Kathy, in one breath.
It's amazing.
Let's begin by asking if there are any observations, any questions, anything hit you a certain way?
I like the knowledge of truth.
Mm.
Yeah. Truth that is in accordance with godliness. Mm-hmm.
Well, he begins this. He usually begins his letters with this last line: "Grace and peace from our God and Father Jesus Christ." That's how he normally begins his letter. So this is a little bit backwards in terms of verses 1 through 4 in terms of the signature Pauline beginning of a letter. And remember, we have several letters in the New Testament written by Paul, to which we might compare this. But what I like about this is how he starts off. Paul, as we know, is one of the most towering figures in the Christian faith. Some would argue that without Paul, there wouldn't be Christianity today, because he was the marketer, the church planner, the one who got out there when it was really, really important to get out there. And the very first word he uses to describe himself is that word servant. And we remember immediately the Last Supper, and when Jesus, after they had dined, took a towel and put it around his waist and washed people's feet, and said, "What I'm doing, I want you to go do." And that we reenact every year when we go into our Maundy Thursday, right? We do our foot washing. Unfortunately, that's one of the most profound but least attended services, because for whatever reason, we have a real disdain for feet these days. I can't imagine it was different then, but we certainly don't have the ceremonial washing of the feet that was done back then in terms of a daily household task. But what we do have is Paul reminding us that first and foremost, he is a servant. He is a servant of God, and he is an apostle of Jesus Christ. Again, we know he's kind of borrowing this term because Jesus had died before Paul was a minister. Jesus had been crucified, and Paul never personally knew Jesus as the 12 apostles did. What he did experience, as we know, is that wonderful conversion experience on the road to Damascus. And because of that, because of how real that was, he calls himself an apostle. And I wonder if you and I, as we read that, aren't reminded of how important it is for you and I to also anchor our faith in that moment or that process in which we too became apostles. Now, if you're like me, you were baptized as a kid. I was over at St. Hugo over on, what road is that? Updike, in a little stone church back in 1962. And that began a journey that just kind of evolved until I became an Episcopalian about 20 years ago. I won't even say until, because I think it continues to evolve. But I think Paul reminds us here that we are apostles of Jesus Christ. We are ones who go forward just as he did with the message of the gospel. And our job is to articulate, according to the vocation that we have, what that gospel is about. Now, very few of us are church planters like he is. I'm probably closest in that I'm a pastor of a church, but every one of us in our vocations is given this ministry of apostleship. So Kathy, as a nurse, Jane, who worked tirelessly her entire career helping those who needed help, Kitty, as a teacher, Pat, in your long life of service to others in and outside the church and your family, are called to define apostleship according to our gifts. Remember, God gave gifts to everybody, but God didn't give the same gift to anybody, right? We each have our own place in the puzzle, our own piece, our own play, we're own puzzle pieces, right? And nobody else is shaped exactly as we are. Nobody else can complete the picture like we can. Some people, and Paul will write about this as we know, he uses this analogy of parts of the body. Who are you to say, because you're not the eye, therefore the foot has no use, right? We don't get to choose which part of the body we are. What we do get to choose is how we're going to live into that vocation. And Paul clearly tells us that as an apostle of Jesus Christ, this is how he's living into it, by planning churches, certainly by writing these letters that I'm sure he never dreamed would be enshrined and published and published and published over the centuries and millennia that they are. But anyway, I think it's important for us when Paul begins, I'm a servant, I'm an apostle, that you and I look at that, look at ourselves in that way and say, what ways are we really serving? I serve myself really, really well, but in what ways am I serving others? That's what I'm being asked. I'm apostle of a lot of things, right? But I'm first called to be an apostle of Jesus Christ, a follower, somebody who seeks to emulate one's life according to the tenets and the teachings and the witness of Jesus. And he does this, to continue on verse 1, for the sake of the faith of God's elect and the knowledge of the truth that is in accordance with godliness. A lot to unpack there. We get to this doctrine of election. Some people will say, well, some are chosen, therefore some are chosen not, some are chosen to be Christians, therefore some are chosen not to be. That can be an argument. And it is about the knowledge of the truth. And Kathy, when you pointed that out as something that stuck out to you, it gives us a sense that there is truth. Many people will ask, well, what is truth, as Pontius Pilate did? But the truth is that love wins. The truth is that there is love in the world, and there is morality in the world. There's God in the world. There's, even among atheists, and I pointed this out in a sermon not long ago, and I don't mean to get down on atheists. I mean, people are people, and we're all equal and loved equally before God. When people say that they have no faith in God and that, in fact, there is no God, and yet they are morally injured by the abuse of children or by senseless violence. If we're more morally injured by those things, why? If there is a moral law, there must be a moral lawgiver, therefore a moral order. And where does that come from? And we don't have a name from it. We just call it God. And God is, you want to call it the force. There's Jehovah. You just, call it what you will. But this idea is that there is a truth, and this truth to some degree is burnished in us, and that is that there is wrongdoing, right? And that's certainly accepted in every culture. When you beat up a kid, that's not cool, right? So anyway, there is a truth. That truth is debated, but Paul is anchoring what he has to say on the knowledge of this truth. And for him, the knowledge of this truth has to do with God and the revelation of God, the knowing of God through Jesus Christ, God's Son, who came to the earth. It's a funny story. Came to the earth in order to love the earth. It makes a lot of sense on many philosophical levels that we could get into. And that God who never lies, I love that little sentence, like an afterthought, promised before the ages began in verse 3, in due time, God revealed his word through the proclamation with which I've been entrusted by the command of God our Savior. You and I are very blessed to be born in a day and age in which we have an availability of knowledge that previous generations have never had. I mean, we can look back and we can say with some sense it's a very good guess that 13.8 billion years ago, the world came into being, and that humans, the first vestiges, began to resemble us about 200,000 years ago. And religion as we know it really started forming about 10,000 years ago. That we have this sense of how time has started and kind of even where it's going, because we look at, because we can study how what it's like. And Paul gets to that by using this phrase in verse 3 of in due time. when humanity had come into its own in the way it had come, God saw fit to say, okay, here's what's happening. And this is when the revelation of Jesus Christ came into the world. And so in that time, revealed to us, we enjoy this sense of God being with us in the way that God's come unto us. And so the first 3 verses, as Kathy pointed out, it's one long monster sentence, right? Paul was very famous for this. It hits the crescendo in verse 4 when he says it's to Titus, my loyal child in the faith that we share. Then, of course, grace and peace from God, our Father, and our Lord Jesus Christ. To take a look at this through the lens of our friend Eugene Peterson. Do you want to go ahead and read this one, Kathy?
I, Paul, am God's slave and Christ's agent for promoting the faith among God's chosen people, getting out the accurate word on God and how to respond rightly to it. My aim is to raise hopes by pointing the way to life without end. This is the life God promised long ago, and he doesn't break promises. Then when the time was right, he went public with his truth. I've been entrusted to proclaim this message by order of our Savior, God himself. Dear Titus, legitimate son in the faith, receive everything God our Father and Jesus our Savior give you.
What do you think of that one, Kathy?
I like the other one better, which isn't using my case. I like when time is right, kind of went along with yours, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Which I have been so grateful to be born in this day and age, in this country, you know. Like I've said before, I've never been hungry. I've never wondered what I could wear. I've never been without a house. So it's a pretty big blessing.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Any other comments on Eugene Peterson here? We'll pop over then to our let's see here, just 16 verses here. We're going to take this next pericope, Titus in Crete. We'll go 5 through 9. And Jane, do you want to read this one?
I left you behind in Crete for this reason, so that you should put in order what remained to be done, and should appoint elders in every town as I directed you, someone who is blameless, married only once, whose children are believers, not accused of debauchery and not rebellious. For a bishop, as God's steward, must be blameless. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or addicted to wine or violent or greedy for gain, but he must be hospitable, a lover of goodness, prudent, upright, devout, and self-controlled. He must have a firm grasp of the word that is trustworthy in accordance with the teaching, so that he may be able both to preach with sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict it.
All right. Any comments?
Yeah, I like that part about having a firm grasp of the word.
I like the fact that he's left behind in Crete. I mean, these people were left in places they weren't familiar with people they didn't know.
Say
Then
that
you
again.
get to convert them. Well, they were left behind in places they didn't know with people that, you know, weren't familiar with them. And then you were supposed to convert them and lead them. It's got to be a trick.
Do we know where Titus is from?
I don't know.
Well, maybe he was from Crete. How do I know?
Yeah, not off the top of my head.
Well, one thing for sure, he spoke the language, and speaking the language and knowing the word very well was about all he needed, I guess.
Yeah.
His job was to find so many people that were morally good, you know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And look at Paul. He came from a totally different background, and he was, you know, preaching all over Eurasia, I guess, you know. Not Eurasia, but the Mediterranean.
Yeah, Mediterranean. Yeah, Pat, any observations from you?
I'm just looking at how he points out that the moral person should be the leader of the church.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm summarizing, you know, what he's saying into one word, but and that holds true for today.
Well, it's interesting because I was just reading an article. There's a wonderful man who I've always admired, a Christian apologist named Ravi Zacharias.
Oh, loved him. Oh.
Yeah, and of course he died, but he's in the midst of a huge scandal, which will probably take away his entire ministry. I mean, he has 300 employees in 15 places, and the whole reason is because he did not meet these recommendations. He ended up not being a man of clean slate. And God calls all kinds of people. I think that's really important as we look at the route to Auburn Hills. I say it again.
No, my phone is talking to me.
Oh, okay. I think it's important that as we look at this, the history of the church, at least the more colorful parts, are a history when these leaders didn't act like this. I mean, but God used them anyway. Who's to say what would have happened to poor old Henry VIII had he not had such problems, that this wonderful tradition would not have, been all that it is, or probably would have simply blossomed in a different way, would be where I take it. But I mean, God is all the time turning broken people and broken situations into really pretty flowers. But up to verse 5, Paul stating, I left you behind in Crete for this reason, and this is his job, and this is the point of the letter. I want you to put in order what needs to be done, and I need you to appoint elders as I directed you. Somebody, and then he goes into the moral code of who these elders should be. And this gets to be really tricky because I mean, I look at myself as a divorced man, and I look at a lot of people who have had some moral failings, perhaps not to the degree that Ravi Zacharias has, but certainly ones that would disqualify you from being here. And I look at how God has been able to use them. But nonetheless, I'm just being contrarian here. But he's looking for somebody who is who's really understood by the community to be what we might call blameless or of good reputation. Somebody whose marriage whose marriage relationship is defined as something that's morally upright, something to look up to. And then it even talks about the kids. We want them to be believers. We want them to be upright. And I don't know what would happen if one's kid, and what if one's kid was called to be, well, there wasn't Islam back then, but to be in a different religion, would he be disqualified? I don't know. Not accused of, and what's debauchery is really you're paying more attention to your carnal appetites than you are to your spiritual ones. And not rebellious. Well, as we all know from knowing bishops in our experience, bishops are the ones that keep the car between the lines. So they definitely need to not be rebellious, but respect authority in some important ways. It's interesting to note that our current bishop, as wild as she is the daughter of a Marine. And so she understands what obeying authority is about. And verse 7, we get that word episcopal again, and that of course means bishop. For a bishop and episcopos as God's steward, and I love that word in terms of describing a bishop, one who is exercising stewardship, right? And that is being a wise oversight, not going to waste things, going to be very careful about what one's watching after, must be blameless, right? Must be one of good reputation, must not be arrogant or ill-tempered or addicted to wine or violence. Must not be a violent person, I hope not, or greedy for gain. Of course, that depends on how you define it, because certainly Paul was, I don't know if Paul would be greedy, but he certainly was very ambitious in what he did. This guy didn't seem to get a lot of sleep. He seemed to be very much married to this idea that he was here to serve, and this is how he was going to serve. But he must be hospitable, a lover of goodness, prudent, upright, devout, self-controlled. My goodness. I think somebody was right, what you were saying before. I hope the candidate pool was rather deep here, but maybe it wasn't. And then he must have a firm grasp of the word that is trustworthy in accordance with the teaching. What was the word back then? What's he talking about?
The Hebrew scriptures?
Definitely Hebrew scriptures. There was no New Testament at the time. So it would have been the Hebrew scriptures as well as the Christian take upon them. So the teaching that Paul had certainly addressed all that the Hebrew scriptures were about. But the idea being Christ is the fulfillment of the law, not the antithesis of the law, but the fulfillment of the law. And why that last phrase, so that he, apparently they're not talking about female bishops quite yet, so that he may be able to both preach with sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict it. So needing to know enough about the orthodoxy of the church, right? The correct teaching of Paul, and not what is taught by the Judaizers or about those who have arisen in both Ephesus and Crete as false teachers. Again, we'll hear more about them as the letter unfolds. But this idea that you have to have a firm grasp of the word and it's trustworthy in accordance with the teaching, so that this bishop, this overseer, is going to be one. So this becomes a character trait. This becomes a part of the job description. That, folks, if you want to be a bishop, you have to be versed enough in the faith to be able to know what's right from wrong. And wouldn't you say that's also true in Christianity? That we kind of know what's right and wrong?
Always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is within you.
Yeah. Yep. Is that a Pauline phrase also? I think so.
It for sure is. Yep.
So he's addressing Titus and Crete. His main job is to find people to oversee the church that meet this job description. It's very interesting. He doesn't say, well, they have to have a car. They've got to have access to a cell phone. They've got to have, and of course, the first century equivalent thereof. He's saying these are the requirements in terms of moral character. This is the job description, is we find a person of this moral character, and then God's able to, he doesn't ask, are you a good organizer? Can you run meetings? Can you give good sermons? None of that. He is asking that you have a moral code that meets this. And then at the end, he does get into knowledge and communication, right? You've got to understand the scripture. You've got to know how to preach it with sound doctrine and refute those who contradict it. So this job description begins with moral requirements, and then it ends with a job description that takes very seriously and states quite clearly, you got to be able to read and write, and you've got to be convincing in the way that you talk. Certainly, I would guess, relying on what Jesus talked about when he said, when you're in the hot seat, the Spirit will speak through you, right? Don't worry about what you're going to say. God will say it through you. So at least having an understanding of that particular aspect of the faith. So let's take a look, verses 5 through 9 of Eugene Peterson. And Kathy, do you want to go ahead and read that as well?
Do you want Jane to read it since she read the last?
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant Jane. Yeah.
Interchangeable. I left you in charge in Crete so that you could complete what I left half done. Appoint leaders in every town according to my instructions. As you select them, ask, is this man well thought of? Is he committed to his wife? Are his children believers? Do they respect him and stay out of trouble? It's important that a church leader responsible for the affairs in God's house be looked up to, not pushy, not short-tempered, not a drunk, not a bully, not money hungry. He must welcome people, be helpful, wise, fair, reverent, have a good grip on himself, and have a good grip on the message, knowing how to use the truth to either spur people on in knowledge or stop them in their tracks if they oppose it.
What do you think of this one?
That's good too.
I like
it.
That one sounds even harder than the other one, to find someone to meet all those requirements.
Yeah. Kitty, you were saying?
I like it. It's a good description for people. Helpful, wise, fair, reverent.
A good grip on himself and on the message.
Right. And stop them in their tracks if they oppose it.
I like that too, Kitty. That stuck out to me.
It's very strong.
Cool. Okay, and then this last pericope is very interesting. And Kitty, I'm going to ask you to read this one.
Okay. There are also many rebellious people, idle talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision. They must be silenced, since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for sordid gain what it is not right to teach. It was one of them, their very own prophet, who said, Cretans are always liars, vicious brutes, lazy gluttons. That testimony is true. For this reason, rebuke them sharply so that they may become sound in the faith, not paying attention to Jewish myths or the commandments of those who reject the truth. To the pure, all things are pure, but to the corrupt and unbelieving, nothing is pure. Their very minds and consciences are corrupted. They profess to know God, but I can't see it. Let's see. But they deny him by their actions. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work.
Thank you. Thank you, Kitty, for reading that. What strikes you here, folks? What word or phrase or?
Well, they get hung up on the circumcision and old rules, old Jewish rules. All the nitpicky stuff, not just that, but eating rules perhaps too.
Yeah.
Well, when he says that testimony is true, what is he referring to? I mean, he's not affirming the fact that Cretans are liars, is he?
We'll unpack that. Well, so being the second half of this 16 verse chapter here, as we've already stated, we start out with Paul and his greeting. We mentioned the situation about Titus in Crete, and he's left behind. He's to establish these elders over the church. Here's what the elders are supposed to be acting like, and then to begin to unpack what the church is looking like. And again, the church in Crete is going to be a number of house churches that are all taken in summation here. And so he's going to talk about certain people in certain of these households. And he's talking about rebellion. There are rebellious people, idle talkers, deceivers. He's talking about those of the circumcision, which, as we know, are Jewish believers, right? And what he's alluding to here is this sense, Kitty, you touched upon it, that those who came from a Jewish background are insisting that the new people become Jewish, follow these Jewish rituals in order to become proper Christians. And that Paul is speaking out as strongly as he can to say that that's not the case. The rebellion, the rebellious people, the idle talkers, the deceivers are those of the same ilk that he talked about in 1 Timothy. And that is, they are teaching a doctrine that is contrary to what he is teaching, probably tied in with money. They're trying to make money off that. Why? The other religions that were around at the time were money-making schemes as well, many of them. And that this Christianity is to have nothing to do with that. And so rebellious in that they are not being obedient to the orthodoxy, shall we call it, that Paul is preaching. They are talking idly, they are deceiving people, and it needs to stop. As he says in verse 11, they must be silenced. So this is from a strong command to Titus from Paul, that your job is going to be silencing them. And part of silencing them is going to be raising up these bishops, these elders that are going to be of a much more, obviously they're teaching to be more orthodox, but as he's just described to us, they're going to be people who have who have morality about them, who are going to really exemplify in their lives the truth of the gospel. And so why must they be silenced? They're upsetting whole families by teaching for sordid gain what is not right to teach. So again, that's where we get the hint that these teachers are after their own, their own worldly gain to do this. And then what Paul's going to do is he's going to quote something that was and I've got a longer quotation from a book here for you. Let me read a portion of this here that's talking about verses really 12 and 13. And that is, before Paul is going to be pursuing his opponents further in terms of their teaching, he's going to give an argument that, as Jane, as you pointed out, takes kind of an unexpected turn. And he's reminded that the conduct of these false teachers is very much in accord with a reputation that Crete had at the time. We obviously, divorced. I mean, many of us can't find Crete on the map, right? I mean, I hope I can. I hope you guys can. But at the time, there was a certain reputation. It's kind of like, we kind of take those in the South, they have a reputation for being hospitable, right? Southern hospitality. There's a sense that in New York, they have a reputation for not saying hi back to you on the sidewalk when you say hi, right? Minnesotans have the opposite reputation of Minnesota nice, they call it. So in Crete, there was this sense that there was a reputation in Crete, and it was expressed in an epigram by a man who lived around the year 600 before the Common Era, so 600 years before Jesus. His name was, and I won't give this to you, Kathy, to
Thank you.
Yeah, Epimenides was his name.
Gosh.
Epimenides, 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 Nides. And this was his saying, or the saying at least that was attributed to him, that Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, lazy gluttons. Okay, so you can see it in the quotation marks there. And what he intends by this seems clear enough. It's not a blanket indictment of all Cretans. Rather, he's reminding them that in the case of false teachers here, that Epimenides, as he's calling one of their own prophets, certainly gave testimony which Paul is saying is true. Their teachers are liars, they're mere talkers and deceivers, as we see in verse 10. Perhaps they also fit the rest of the description: evil brutes, right? Rebellious people, lazy gluttons, for the sake of dishonest gain. Again, that's verse 11. In any case, he's trying to shame them, right? Both the teachers and any who would follow them, by saying, this is all very Cretan of you. Okay, so here you are in Crete. And as you all know, this is what's commonly known about Cretans, and that's what y'all are, in this sense of the island's unsavory reputation from the outside. And the quote itself, again, I'm reading from a commentary, has an interesting history. According to a well-established tradition, there's an author who wrote something called the Hymn of Zeus from the year, like the 4th century before Jesus. And another book, that the reason the Cretans are always liars was that they claimed to possess the tomb of Zeus, who of course is a god and could not have died. So that's why they're given this reputation, is because in Crete they said, oh, well, we have the tomb where Zeus. It's like saying we have God's tomb. When it'd be like, you guys are a bunch of losers, you guys are really trying to make some money off the tourists, because we know God's not dead, right? Come here, see God's tomb. But what Paul did mean by calling Epimenides one of their own prophets, what did he mean? Well, possibly he intended something similar to where, remember in the Gospel of John, when Caiaphas spoke prophetically without intending to do more, more likely Paul's reflecting. Jane, why don't you get out your Bible? Do you have it right there?
Yeah.
Okay. Turn to John It's in what we call the New Testament. It's the fourth of the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John.
All right. I'm getting
Chapter 11.
John 11.
Yep. And I want you to read what Caiaphas said, verses 49 through 51.
Okay, I'm still getting there.
It's in the New Testament.
Right.
Yeah, John 11, verses 49 through 51.
Okay, just a second. I'm going through the interlinear, so it takes longer.
Okay, that's fine.
John 11, what were the verses?
Verses 49, 50, and 51. 3 verses. It should be Caiaphas speaking.
Okay. But a certain one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing, nor consider that it is profitable for us that one man die for the people, and not all the nation to perish." But he did not say this from himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was about to die on behalf of the nation, and not only on behalf of the nation, but that he also might gather into one the children of God who had been scattered. Then from that day they took counsel that they might kill him. Yeah.
And so Caiaphas is speaking prophetically without intending to do so.
Right.
And he's saying the same thing about Epimenides, that he's speaking prophetically without meaning to do so, right? In calling Cretans liars, vicious brutes, lazy gluttons. And in this case, Paul's simply directing that towards the enemies that he is identifying here. And those are, of course, people who are going against what Orthodox teaching would be. So Paul is speaking out against, as he did in 1 Timothy. He's speaking of in the strongest way possible against those who would really disparage orthodoxy. And so we understand this in verse 13 when he says that testimony is true. He's affirming that. For this reason, rebuke them sharply so that they may become sound in the faith. Now, I'm not sure that that's going to make them necessarily sound in the faith. As we know, the best way to make a friend is not necessarily to criticize them in the strongest way necessary or available, but probably to gently point out another way. Verse 14, not paying attention to Jewish myths or commandments of those who reject the truth. Again, another characterization of what this teaching is, a Jewish myth. And then verse 15, to the pure, all things are pure. But to the corrupt and unbelieving, nothing is pure. Again, strong terms condemning his opposers. Their very minds and consciences are corrupted. They profess to know God, but they deny him by their actions. They're detestable, disobedient, unfit for any work. So I think he's got an opinion about these. What do you think, Pat?
He has very strong opinions. And he said he's teaching Titus so that Titus can teach. And yet nowhere in any of his writings for Titus or Timothy does he say forgive them. And if they have changed their ways, they will be incorporated into the trustworthy.
He's addressing what they need to do before they get there.
Well, you can't...
Before they get to the point where they can be forgiven.
But you can't get someone, as Father Chris just said, by criticizing harshly.
I don't think
without first building them up, because when you do that, what happens to people who are criticized? That's what they hear, criticism first. If I were to say to any one of you, oh, you don't really mean that, you know that, and on, the first thing you do is put up a wall. And that's part of what I'm seeing here, even though that isn't what happened to everybody. There were some who heard the truth and didn't reject it. But what happened to the rest of them?
Yeah.
I think he's what he's addressing here is people whose consciences are already corrupted. The implication is that they're not reachable. So I think his thrust is on the teaching to build up the bishops so that they can convert and teach those who are teachable. And that was Paul's thrust, was teaching.
Yeah.
Teaching, converting, spreading the word. And he had a lot to do and probably not a lot of time to do it in. A lot of ground to cover.
Like our lives, right? Right, Jane?
Yeah.
Pat, I want you to read this in Eugene Peterson, if you could.
For there are a lot of rebels out there, full of loose, confusing, and deceiving talk. Those who were brought up religious and ought to know better are the worst. They've got to be shut up. They're disrupting entire families with their teaching, and all for the sake of a fast buck. One of their own prophets said it best. The Cretans are liars from the womb, barking dogs, lazy bellies. He certainly spoke the truth. Get on them right away. Stop that diseased talk of Jewish make-believe and made-up rules so they can recover a robust faith. Everything is clean to the clean-minded. Nothing is clean to the dirty-minded. Unbelievers, they leave their dirty fingerprints on every thought and act. They say they know God, but their actions speak louder than their words. They're real creeps, disobedient, good for nothings.
What are your thoughts, folks? Kathy?
I said, it reminds me of two kids on the playground. Let's just throw insults at each other.
That's my, this might be good for a few in the way he's setting it up. But I think that those who, the weaker ones, won't be touched. And by weak, I mean those who have already made up their minds about what is right and what isn't.
Yeah, this is a really, I like the colloquialisms here, don't you? It does get to the point where, I mean, again, 40,000 feet, he's looking to name the opposition for Titus and give Titus a little bit of advice on what needs to be done and said, so that he picks the bishops, the overseers, who are going to be able to watch over the church and to be able to have, remember, one of the things that he asked for about bishops here is that they have to have a good grip on the message, knowing how to use the truth to either spur people on or stop them in their tracks if they oppose it. So this is all about those who oppose it. And he's pulling, he's, excuse me, he's pulling no punches here. I mean, he's very clear that this is why they need to be stopped and what they're doing. And in using this quote, well understood probably in the time and age, and especially the location, to get his point across, that in no uncertain terms, the health of the church depends on those who are in it for greedy gain, for, I love this saying here, a fast buck, need to be stopped. And the church today, I'm not sure if we've taken the same, the same urgency and immediacy towards saying that, look, those who are in ministry to make money, it's not, you don't follow them. It's not the way to go. And so, I wonder what we can learn, because there's certainly, and this is what's really one of the big things that's ruined Christianity in terms of having a decent reputation in the culture from hopefully maybe what it used to be, is that they're full of pedophiles, judgmental people, and people are only in it for the money. And Paul is trying to say, no, root this out. We can't have our leaders being in it for the money. We can't have our leaders being in it for their own sordid gain. So anyway, I know it's 1 o'clock. I know it's time to kind of shut that for the moment. We are on Tuesday, February 9th, a week from today. We will be studying Titus chapter 2, just us. We're not meeting at 7 o'clock with regards to our 7 o'clock Bible study, because I have a vestry meeting tonight. So our 7 o'clock group won't be meeting. Jane, you're going to be put a little bit on pause because we're going to be using the Zoom rooms from 6:30 to probably maybe we'll be done by 8. But we'll see from then. What we've decided as a vestry is being on Zoom for 2 hours just doesn't cut it. So you will have a chance to pray at 8. Hopefully I'll stick around and be able to pray with you. And then so then a week from today, as I said, is Shrove Tuesday. So do come at 6 o'clock a week from today. We'll be here at noon doing our Titus chapter 2, and then we'll kick off Monday, Shrove Tuesday. Yep, with pancakes, and Jim Kenning's going to kind of host that for us, which is going to be great. And we'll all be invited to bring pancakes of our own making. I've been eating more keto, so I've been telling my wife, look, I want a cauliflower-based waffle, which I'm sure she's rolling her eyes on. Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
I will tell you that Trader Joe's.
I think you'll be making that yourself.
Yeah, well, that may be true.
With syrup.
Oh, chocolate.
Yeah. As long as it's sugar-free, you're good. But or it could be savory. You can put an egg on top and hollandaise sauce, right? Which is actually very good. They sell one down at Cocoa Fairfields when that reopens. It's a wonderful savory waffle with an egg and hollandaise on it. Anyway, so that's a week from today. 2 weeks from today, we're going to take a shift and we're going to jump into 1, 2, 3 John. Okay, so we're gonna table this after next week at this time, and we're going to look at 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. What I love about that, it is full of hard to understand judgmentalism, but it is also full of love. Christ is love, and those who are of Christ love, and on and on and on. So in the meantime, my friends, any other questions before we break?
Yeah.
When is the Taizé service?
It's tomorrow.
It is tomorrow. Okay.
Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. It's going to be great. Georgia and I have been going back and forth by email with all the music and Ellen, and it should really be good. Half hour of prayer and praise.
Good. And that's at what time again? 7?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, it will be good.
My poor calendar. I have nothing to go, but I keep adding things to it.
So I should just check in at 8 and see what's happening.
And see what's happening. Hopefully we'll be done by then. Yeah, we don't like to last forever on our vestry. We are paying a special attention to to what the vestry does. I mean, we're making sure the building improvements are done. We're talking finances because we're taking on this debt. Our pledging is used to the old budget, but our loans come in this year because we're building, and so we're going to have to find a way to. We don't need to find it. God needs to find it. We need a way to open our hearts and minds and say, God, you gave us this community. What do you want us to do? So we'll be, I'm sure, talking about that as well. But in the meantime, may the blessing of Almighty God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be among you and be with you this day and always. Amen.
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 Thank
Have
you.
a good one.
A good